Te koto te whānau o Auckland Unitarians. Te koto nā manahiri. No mai, haere mai. Haere mai ki tene whare karakia a te atua. Te koto, te tato katoa. We welcome you into this circle of community where for 116 years, Auckland Unitarians have gathered in this space to become all we could be. We have come into this room of hope where our hearts and minds are open to the future. We have come into this room of justice where we set aside our fear to name freely every oppression. We have come into this room of love where we know that no lives are insignificant. We have come into this room of song, where we unite our voices in the somber and the beautiful melodies of life. My opening words are a portrait of a dog as an older guy by Kataya Kopovich. When his owner died in 2000 and a new family moved into their Moscow apartment, he went to live with mongrels in the park. In summer, there was plenty of food. Kids often left behind sandwiches, hot dogs, and other stuff. He didn't have a big appetite, still missing his old guy. He too was old. The ladies no longer excited him, and he didn't burn calories chasing them around. Then winter came, and the little folk abandoned the park. The idea of eating from the trash occurred to him, but the minute he started rummaging in the overturned garbage container, a voice in his head said, "No, Rex, the remnants of a good upbringing lower our natural survival skills." I met him again in the early spring of 2001. He looked terrific. Turning gray became him. His dark shepherd eyes were perfectly bright, like those of a puppy. I asked him how he sustained himself in this new free market situation when even human species suffered from malnutrition. In response, he told me a story, how at first he thought that life without his man wasn't worth it, how those who petted him when he was a pet then turned away from him, and how one night he had a revelation. His man came to him in his sleep, tapped him on his skinny neck and said, "Let's go shopping." So the next morning he took the subway and went to the street market where they used to go together every Sunday, and where vendors recognized him and fed him to his heart's content. "Perhaps you should move closer to that area," I ventured. "No, I'll stay here," he sighed. "Oldies shouldn't change their topography." That's what my man said. Indeed, he sounded like one himself. If ever there were a time for a candle in the darkness, this would be it. Using a spark of hope, kindle the flame of love, ignite the light of peace, and feed the flame of justice. When I first arrived in New Zealand, there was a Kiwiism that greatly troubled me. "She'll be right." It threw me, as I can't think of an equivalent aphorism from my native tongue. Of course, in a country that can make Trump president, that's not so surprising. What I like about it is its optimism. Don't get too worked up or create a tempest in a teacup over something that will work itself out. What I don't like about it is its optimism. It smacks of my childlike understanding of hope. Hope in my young mind was kind of an insurance policy, a belief that God would not desert us if we were faithful. Hope provided for miraculous recoveries, last-minute rescues. It meant that the sun would always rise, that spring would follow winter, that seeds would grow, that birth would produce new life, that the Lone Ranger would arrive on time. Living in the age we do is pretty much pummeled into dust, this idyllic understanding of hope. And just saying she'll be right doesn't make it so. Unitarian theologian, teacher, and author Rebecca Parker summarizes how unright it is. We are living in a post-slavery, post-Holocaust, post-Vietnam, post-Hiroshima world. We are living in the aftermath of collective violence that has been severe, massive, and traumatic. The scars from slavery, genocide, and meaningless war mark our bodies. We're living in the midst of rainforests burning, the rapid death of species, the growing pollution of the air and water, and new mutations of racism and violence. How do we live in this world? What is our religious task? The traditional response to religious liberalism is to place our hope in the future, that a new age will dawn. I've done my share of calling for the end of evil empires and announcing that the promised land is just around the corner. But I have come to believe that we need to let go of this religious myth. We need to face more honestly the conditions of devastation that we are in the midst of here and now. As we enter the new millennium, we need to see ourselves as people living in the aftermath of cataclysmic violence rather than as people awaiting the overthrow of the present world order and the birth of the new. We must see the world as it is, focusing our attention on the marks of past violence in our personal and collective experience. We must notice the breakdown, sorrow, and legacies of injustice that characterize our current world order. From this place of honesty, we must discover how we can live among the ruins. Parker published this 11 years ago, when the idea of President Trump wasn't even a straight line for a stand-up comic. It has only gotten much worse. For instance, at that time, there were not the present 65 million plus refugees, asylum seekers, and internally displaced persons in the world due primarily to war, racism, poverty, and religious strife, trying to find safe haven. Half of them are estimated to be children. I know on both an intuitive and experiential level that hope is essential to successfully living amongst the ruins. It is prerequisite to new life, like waiting with which it walks hand in hand. It is an Advent theme worthy of our reflection with Christmas on the horizon. I've been living in very real terms with both waiting and hoping the last couple of weeks. I and others have been seeking to take advantage of a more sympathetic government that says it values kindness and justice, to bring back to New Zealand the 11 Indian students to whom we gave sanctuary last February. As you will remember, the government at the time would not relent in the face of the blatant injustice they suffered and deported them. In part to make examples of them for exposing the corruption of the system. Since then, the deportation order has stained them, like the mark of Ham in their native country. They have been shamed and treated as pariahs, unable to find work and facing, in some cases, insurmountable debt. We learned during their stay with us that they were merely pawns in a $5 billion international student industry that depended on corrupt agents in India, educational institutions in New Zealand that didn't educate, an overwhelmed immigration system granting visas, and government policies that were more concerned with providing cheap labor to business than providing the students with the meaningful qualifications they were promised. While the students were in sanctuary, we were comforted by visits from the Labour Party leader, the future Prime Minister, and members of Parliament who now make up the government. They spoke strongly about the injustice being done and later brought up the issue at question time at Parliament. As they were in opposition, it was to no avail. With the recent election putting our champions in government, my childlike understanding of hope kicked in. She'll be right, I thought. The Lone Ranger is on his way. We'll have them home by Christmas. Rachel and I have some limited access to those in power. Using those avenues, we have discovered that rectifying this injustice is far from simple. The immigration minister can't simply, with a wave of his pen, turn this around, no matter how much he and his party might wish. The bureaucracy that doesn't change with government has to be brought in line. The opposition, which deported the students, has to be kept at bay. The implications for hundreds of other students who have similar problems has to be considered. Immigration New Zealand's lack of resources has to be rectified. And they have to do this after just learning of all the disasters in every aspect of our national life the former government has kept hidden from the public until having to be revealed by law this week. Then there's the question of failure of nerve discussed last week. Will fear keep the new government from exercising their integrity and reason, choosing to wait fruitlessly for Godot to come and make it right? Too early to tell if she'll make it right. What felt like it should be a walk in the park to make right now feels post-apocalyptic. The outcome we have hoped for is uncertain. All I wanted for Christmas was the students' return. But at the moment, it looks naive to hope they will be under the tree. So what is hope in such times? It turns out hope is not depending on the Lone Ranger. Hope at its heart is relational. It is fostered in community. In 2001, Linda Hansen published an article entitled Journey Toward Hope in the UU World. In it, she shared a story from a colleague, Terry Sweetser. The Sunday before Thanksgiving, he told the familiar story of the pilgrims coming to the New World in search of religious freedom. But he emphasized a dimension of the story unfamiliar to most Americans. Not all of the passengers who sailed on the Mayflower were pilgrims. In fact, only 41 belonged to that group. In order to fill the ship and to bring people with skills the pilgrims themselves didn't have. The Pilgrims had to offer passage to 61 other men and women who had their own reasons for wanting to leave England. The Pilgrims called these people strangers. Relations between the Pilgrims and strangers were not easy. When the Mayflower landed far north of the Virginia territory for which it had been headed, some of the strangers argued that they were now freed from any original agreements and could strike out on their own. The Mayflower Compact, an historical agreement to covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic, suggests that both the Pilgrims and the strangers recognized that their chances of success and even of survival were better if they worked together than if they went their separate ways. We need intimate relationships, but we need other kinds of relationships just as much. We need strangers, people whose value is more in their difference from us than their likeness to us. People who will shake us up and make us look at the world differently. In our congregation, at our best, strangers are viewed not as threats, but as having inherent worth and dignity, as being indispensable parts of the interdependent web to which we all belong. Our principles don't tell us that only our friends have inherent value. We insist everyone does. Our principles call us to practice what the Reverend William Schultz calls the fragile art of hospitality. All of this sounds so good in our principles, but is so difficult to live out. Out of his own experience of community, Parker Palmer discovered this timeless truth. Community is that place where the person you least want to live with always lives. He writes in the company of strangers, and when that person moves away, someone else arises to take his or her place. Palmer reminds us that the person who most troubles us is likely to be the person who draws out what we least like about ourselves, an experience from which we can learn and grow if we have the courage to face it. It turns out that hope that makes a difference requires trust, and trust requires being vulnerable. She'll be right only if we put ourselves at risk. But what a risk. In a world in which we can be betrayed by our closest friends, isn't it folly to open ourselves to strangers? Just ask a concentration camp survivor. In Elie Wiesel's fourth novel, The Town Beyond the Wall, his main character, Michael, like Wiesel, a concentration camp survivor, opens himself once again to the risk of relationship. His experience in the camps has left him without family or friends and without any hope for meaning in human life. In an exchange of life stories with a Spaniard named Pedro, who has also experienced profound loss, Michael begins to understand his own past and feels the need to return to his hometown, even though this town is now behind the Iron Curtain, and Michael would be imprisoned if caught there. But more than that, Michael rediscovers the joy of friendship. Before they part, Pedro says to Michael, "From now on, you can say, 'I am Pedro,' and I am Michael." The worst happens to Michael. He is imprisoned, tortured, left virtually alone. His cellmate is a young man, a stranger, so overwhelmed by his own suffering that he has sought escape from the world by completely withdrawing from it, by retreating to some psychic space, seemingly oblivious to anyone or anything. Michael was once a stranger, locked in his own suffering, and Pedro reached out to him. Michael decides to try to do the same for this young man. He tells the stranger that someday you'll tell me your name and you'll ask me, "Who are you?" And I'll answer, "I'm Pedro." And that will be proof that man survives, that he passes himself along. Later, in another prison, someone will ask your name, and you'll say, "I'm Michael." And then you will know the taste of the most genuine victories. Instead of desiring the escape of mental withdrawal for himself, Michael instead reaches out in the hope of drawing this young man back into human life. We do not learn whether Michael succeeds, but we know that he tries, that Michael, once a stranger himself, offers community to another stranger in turn. We do know that Michael has found his humanity again, and therein has found meaning and hope. In a world of greater and greater mistrust, people are desperate for the hope found in community. The hope that it is possible not just to tolerate, but to benefit from, to live fuller lives because of the company of strangers. It may be that the greatest contribution our religious communities can make to the larger world is not our social justice projects, important as those are, but our modeling for the larger world an alternative reality to the mistrust, inequality, and narrow self-interest that is rampant there. Last February, we took a risk in welcoming the Indian students, and they in turn took a risk in accepting the invitation. We and they put trust on the line in hopes of furthering justice. While we did not achieve it then, a bond was formed. They are us, and we are them. We have remained in relationships since they were deported, sifting through the ashes of injustice to build a better world. The way to change the world, contemporary Unitarian Universalist activist Betty Soskin tells us, is to be what we want to see. What hope we might offer to the world, the closer our congregations come to living out our principles, the closer we come to being communities of genuine respect and democracy, genuinely celebrating difference. Then we can say with meaning and enthusiasm, she'll be right. Amen. For our meditation, I invite you to consider these words by Stephen Schick. Get comfortable. Spirit of my longing and lonely heart, help me travel through the barren borderlands that separate me from others. Teach me to willingly explore relationships with those who frighten or threaten me. Grant me the courage to risk confidently my own comforts, that I may make others more comfortable. And when I am burdened by the isolating choices I have made, grant me the wisdom to invite a stranger to travel with me. Open my heart to my new companion's needs and desires until I relax my defensiveness and become a calming presence. As we travel, grant me the vision to notice how each step we take together moves us closer to the promised land, where all souls grow in hope and the resilience of love. For my closing words, I do not wish to breathe another breath if it is not shared with others. The breath of life is not mine alone. I brought myself to be with you, hoping that by inhaling the compassion, the courage, the hope found here, I can exhale the fear, the selfishness, the separateness I keep so close to my skin. I cannot live another moment, at least not one of joy, unless you and I find our oneness somewhere among each other, somewhere between the noise, somewhere within the silence of the next breath. And now may we go forth in the certainty of faith, the knowledge of love, and in the vision of hope. And in our going, may we be blessed with all good things on this day and forevermore. Amen.